My name's Siana and I've lived near the Greendale fault line for most of my life. And just to remind us all that we're here today to discuss the particular consent, but it's also obviously part of a greater systemic way that we make environmental decisions. What I'd like to offer is not my thoughts on this particular consent, but my take on our processes for environmental decision making in general. I think we've made it so much more complicated to do the right thing than it needs to be. And I'd like us all to take a moment to imagine what it would look like if everybody in Canterbury were to have an instantaneous mindset change, and if we could come together to restore Canterbury's biodiversity. So imagine what the region would look like if we set aside the next 10 years of our life. Well, those of us who have 10 years left, and speaking for everybody. But if we came together and we made the health of our land, our rivers, our forests, and our communities the most important thing to us. Now, if you have that image in your head, what are the things that might make that image feel impossible or less possible to achieve? Now, there's no right or wrong answer to this at all. I just want you to keep that in the back of your minds. So last night I was telling my family about this meeting, and my sister Jess asked what was wrong with more nitrates going into the soil, the accumulation of nitrates. And I'm sure many people in this room would have a very thorough and comprehensive answer to that question. But the first thing that came to my mind was a metaphor. And I said that the intensification of farming is like putting an athlete on steroids. So it's going to help that athlete win the race, it's going to boost their performance in competitions, and they'll be a great athlete, but not for long. So eventually, they're going to suffer from severe malfunctioning of the kidneys, liver, heart, and reproductive system. So the reasons that an athlete may turn to steroids, and the reasons that we might increase stock numbers, intensify farming practices, and use things like synthetic nitrogen fertilisers, they're basically the same set of reasons. So that's competition, performance pressure, and perhaps desperation. Actually, in many cases, desperation. And also because it seemed like a good idea at the time. Now, imagine that we are profiting from that athlete. So we're making a lot of money off them, we might be sponsoring them. Basically, it's in our best interest to let that athlete be on steroids and to just turn a blind eye to it, but we'd probably prefer that nobody found out. That wouldn't look great. Now imagine we're the athlete's coach. So now that relationship's a little bit closer, but we're facing pressure from our bosses, we've got sort of like, the public eyes on us. We might give in to peer pressure and say to the athlete, okay, hit the steroids, but keep it on the down low, be careful, manageable doses, etc. Now imagine instead that we're that athlete's friend, their childhood friend. Now we're going to value them as a person much more than we're going to value the medals that they win or the races that they win or the money that they make. And because their experience would matter to us. And I think most of us would have a stronger reaction against a friend of ours being pressured into taking steroids than we would have to the intensification of farming. And ultimately, I think that many of us still struggle to see the land as being alive in and of itself, and not just for us. So often I think the decision-making structures that we use and the processes that we have for talking about environmental conflicts when there's disagreement, those conflicts and spaces don't allow for us to recognise and honour the land's aliveness or its beingness. I think we have a hard enough time even trying to recognise and process that within each other, let alone something that's so different from the human experience. And that's a monumental problem. It means we can't make environmental decisions properly. So in a recent Stuff article, I came across a comment from ECan Mid-Canterbury councillor Ian McKenzie, who praised MHV and said that the science, development and application behind the scheme was world-leading. He said, "I can say not a single environmentalist in New Zealand would understand the science behind it." It's so good. I loved that. And he's absolutely right. You can say that, but it does not make it true. And I do really love when I hear comments like this, because I'm actually given the rare opportunity to use the degree that I still haven't paid off yet. So I did my Masters in Science Communication, so I specifically trained to facilitate the transfer of knowledge and understanding between scientists and the public. So I hope that you can have some level of trust in me when I stand here as a science communicator and say to Ian McKenzie, that's actually not relevant. It's not relevant at all. Because more knowledge doesn't necessarily lead to better decisions. Science can give us a lot of information, but it can't tell us what to do with that information, and it can't help us to distinguish between right and wrong. So our values and our cultural beliefs are ultimately going to determine how we receive and interpret any of the science that we read. And until we learn how to know things in a different way, and until we change how our knowledge system works and how we actually know them, we're not going to be able to make good decisions for the environment or for one another. An example would be, think about how much more we now know about climate change than we did 20 years ago. But knowing more hasn't led to us knowing better. We're still buggering it up a lot. For example, a metaphor we commonly use to justify our decisions is this balancing the environment with the economy. Now, using this method, we're never going to make good decisions because it's a human-centric approach. So the notion that you can separate these two things, that's a myth, and that's a myth that we created. The scales, we made them up, they don't exist. That's a myth as well. The economy is a human method to understand the distribution of goods within our social structure. That's something that we use to understand what's going on and to help us navigate our relationships with one another. But when we say the environment in this little balancing act that we like to do, what do we mean by that? Just take a second and think about what you mean when you might use the environment in that way. And I don't think we actually mean the environment. We mean what we think the environment is. But that's not the same thing. Because our perspective of what the environment is always going to be incredibly limited by our own experience. So the actual environment, the big out there, our home, everything, involves everything we know, but it also involves everything that we don't know as well. So we can't put it on a nice, neat set of scales. And it also includes the lived experience and perspective of every other living thing on the planet. And by definition, that is beyond capable of what we as a human being are capable of conceiving. And it goes beyond life as a human being. And we can only see anything from our perspective of, being a human. So ultimately, those decision-making tools that we like to use, or we like to use in our conversations with one another, don't work. Until we truly learn to value what it's like to not be a person, we can't make better decisions in our relationship with ecosystems. So in Extinction Rebellion, we often talk about climate change as being an existential crisis. But what does that mean? I'd like to read a passage from Uncivilization, written by Douglas Hine and Paul Kingsnorth. Those who witness extreme social collapse at first hand seldom describe any deep revelation about the truths of human existence. What they do mention, if asked, is their surprise at how easy it is to die. So let's just sit with our deaths for a second. And the people whose hands you might have just shaken, because they're going to die too. But apparently, according to these guys, it's actually easier than we think it's going to be. And if it's going to be easy to die, which is a thing that terrifies most of us, then maybe it's easier than we think to make better decisions in our relationship with the planet. Death is the one thing we have in common with every other living thing in the world. So perhaps we should take a second, we should climb down off our high horse and cultivate some empathy, because it's not all about us. I think we could all take something from the Portuguese saying, which is descender de te. It means simply unshit yourself. We could all do with unshitting ourselves. And I say that as an environmentalist. Environmentalists need to unshit themselves, farmers need to unshit themselves, politicians, councillors, everybody, unshit yourself. We need to be able to see and appreciate each other for the vulnerable and flawed creatures that we are. So when you're faced with a decision, and we're faced with them every day, which is going to be the one that will lead to more heartbeats, more beating hearts, more wing beats, more beating wings, more blinks, more hiccups, more tail flicks, more eyes, more legs, more lives, more loves. Because by the time the curtain falls on our lives, things will appear much more simple than we're making them now. Thank you.